Welcome to Revenge Mag. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and step into the stories that serve the quiet revenge.
Hello everyone. My name is Sophia Carter. I'm 32 years old. The sound that still echoes in my memory isn't the music or the laughter. It's the scrape of a chair against polished marble, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the ballroom. I was standing just outside the main table at the Langham Boston, crystal chandeliers blazing overhead, when my sister's voice carried farther than she intended. "Sophia, you're at the wrong table," Vanessa Lang said, lifting her champagne glass without looking at me. "This one's for the family." There was a pause, a collective inhale. 200 guests turned their heads in unison. Donors, executives, politicians, people who knew the Lang name the way others knew prayer. A few smiles flickered. Someone laughed, uncertain at first, then louder when Vanessa didn't correct herself. I felt it then, that familiar sinking heat in my chest, the one that told me I'd made the mistake of hoping again. Behind Vanessa, my mother, Catherine Lang, sat perfectly still, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Silence had always been her language when it came to me. I stood there, hands clasped around a small black purse, the kind you buy because it's practical, not because it announces anything about you. Around me, the room shimmered. Tailored suits, silk gowns, glasses that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. This wasn't just a gala. It was a performance, and I was once again being reminded of my role. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong in a room you were invited into, you'll understand what that moment did to me. And if stories about quiet endurance, family power, and consequences interest you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read more of them than you might think. That night didn't come out of nowhere. It was simply the loudest version of something that had been happening for most of my life. The Lang family was old money wrapped in modern influence. My grandfather, Alexander Lang, built the Lang Group from a single rundown property into a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. The family compound on Beacon Hill was whispered about the way landmarks are: solid, historic, untouchable. Governors had dined there. CEOs had negotiated deals over its antique dining table. Every autumn, the Lang Foundation Gala transformed charity into theater, education initiatives, arts funding, scholarships. On paper, it was everything I believed in. In practice, it was a carefully curated reminder of who mattered and who didn't. What the guests didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I was the only one in the family who actually worked with the children the foundation claimed to serve. While Vanessa managed brand partnerships and Catherine sat on boards she rarely attended, I spent my days teaching art at Jefferson Elementary School, helping kids mix colors, find confidence, and believe that their ideas mattered. That irony wasn't accidental. It was inherited. I was 8 years old when Alexander Lang became my grandfather. Not by blood, Vanessa made sure everyone knew that, but by choice. My parents died in a car accident, leaving me without relatives and a future that could have easily disappeared into paperwork and foster placements. Alexander's late wife had once been my mother's teacher. That thin thread of connection was enough for him. "Family isn't blood," he'd said to the judge during the adoption hearing. "It's commitment." For a few years, it almost felt true. Alexander taught me chess in his study, hung my drawings on his office wall, introduced me as his granddaughter without hesitation. Those moments were real. I know they were. Then Catherine, my foster mother, started correcting him. "Your adopted granddaughter," she'd say gently, smiling as if precision were a kindness. Vanessa learned fast. By middle school, she'd mastered exclusion without ever raising her voice. "This is Sophia," she'd tell her friends. "She lives with us." Never sister, never family. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, it was already normal. Normal to be seated slightly farther away. Normal to be left out of family decisions. Normal to be reminded, subtly, constantly, that gratitude was expected but belonging was not. When college came, Alexander offered me a position at the Lang Group. Marketing, operations, a clear path into the family legacy. Catherine suggested something else. "Teaching might suit you better," she said. Service dressed up as advice. I chose teaching anyway, not because I was pushed, but because it was the one place where my presence didn't need defending. Still, every Thursday, I had lunch with Alexander, just the two of us. He asked about my students, my lesson plans, my dreams. Sometimes his lawyer, Benjamin Hayes, joined us, folders in hand, conversations lowering when I approached. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was used to not asking questions I wasn't invited to. Looking back now, those lunches were something else entirely, preparation. But that understanding came later. That night at the gala, standing beneath chandeliers that had never once felt like they belonged to me, all I knew was this. I had spent 24 years learning how to be invisible in rooms like that. And for the first time, something in me was starting to shift. I learned early that belonging was something you could almost touch, but never quite hold. After the adoption papers were signed, people liked to tell me how lucky I was. Lucky to live in a Beacon Hill house with original crown molding. Lucky to have a grandfather whose name opened doors. Lucky to wear clothes that fit and eat dinners that arrived on silver trays. Gratitude was expected from me the way silence was expected from furniture, present, unobtrusive, and unquestioning. For a while, I tried to believe that luck was enough. When I was 9, Alexander Lang gave me my first chess set. He sat across from me in his study, sunlight filtering through tall windows, and taught me how to think 3 moves ahead. The board doesn't care where the pieces came from, he said, only how they move. I held on to that sentence for years, even when the world around me seemed determined to prove the opposite. Catherine never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Correction was her weapon of choice. At family dinners, if someone referred to me as her daughter, she would smile and clarify, "Sophia is adopted," she'd say lightly, as if she were sharing an interesting fact. If Alexander introduced me as his granddaughter, she would add a qualifier. Always gentle, always precise. Vanessa watched and learned. She was 4 years older than me, beautiful in a way that came from certainty. The certainty that the house was hers. The certainty that the name was hers. The certainty that nothing she did could ever make her disposable. At first, she treated me like an accessory, a younger shadow that followed her around. Then slowly, that shadow became an inconvenience. By middle school, she had refined exclusion into an art. Invitations that never reached me. Group photos where I was told to stand just outside the frame. Friends who learned quickly what mattered and what didn't. "She lives with us," Vanessa would say when asked. It was never said with cruelty. That was what made it effective. At school, teachers praised my manners. At home, my quietness was interpreted as understanding my place. I told myself it didn't hurt. I focused on being useful instead. When Catherine hosted charity luncheons, I helped staff carry trays. When Vanessa complained about her workload, I proofread her presentations without being asked. I learned that being needed was the closest thing to being wanted. Alexander noticed. He always did. He would slip me small notes of encouragement, take me for ice cream after difficult evenings, ask me questions that went beyond politeness. "What are you thinking about lately?" he'd say. Not, "What are you doing?" "What are you thinking?" Those conversations saved me. When it came time for college, the lines were already drawn. Alexander offered me a role at the Lang Group after graduation, marketing like Vanessa or operations, learning the business from the inside. It was an olive branch, a chance to step fully into the family sphere. Catherine suggested I consider something else. "You're good with children," she said. "Teaching would be meaningful work for you." It was framed as concern. It felt like a boundary. I chose teaching anyway, but not for the reasons they assumed. Art had always been the place where I felt most myself. Colors didn't care about last names. Paper didn't judge where you came from. In classrooms, I watched children light up when they realized their ideas mattered. I recognized that look. I had worn it once. Jefferson Elementary wasn't glamorous. The paint peeled, supplies were limited, but every day I walked into a room where no one questioned why I was there. I wasn't the adopted one. I was Miss Carter, and that was enough. Vanessa laughed when she found out. Elementary school art. She said like it was a punchline. Catherine nodded approvingly. "Service suits you," she added. Alexander understood without explanation. "You have your mother's soul," he told me. She believed education could change lives. In those moments, I felt anchored to something real. What no one else knew was that my relationship with Alexander deepened during those years. Every Thursday, we met for lunch. Sometimes at a quiet restaurant, sometimes at his office. We talked about my students, my frustrations, my hopes. Occasionally, Benjamin Hayes joined us, files tucked under his arm, conversations pausing until I sat down. I never asked why. I had learned that curiosity could be dangerous. Looking back, I see the pattern. The way Alexander listened more than he spoke. The way he asked me what I would change if I had the power to do so. The way he watched quietly as Vanessa rose within the company and Catherine tightened her grip on appearances. I didn't know then that he was measuring something. Not success, not ambition, character. By the time the Lang Foundation Gala approached that year, I was used to being warned. Vanessa texted me first. Please don't talk about your teaching job to the donors. It's not the image we're presenting. Catherine followed with a call. Dress code is formal, designer preferably. The photographers will be everywhere. I borrowed a gown from a colleague, navy blue, elegant but understated. It had been worn before, that felt appropriate. The morning before the gala, an email arrived from Benjamin Hayes. It was brief, formal. He asked me to make sure I stayed for the entire evening. Documentation would be provided at the appropriate time. I read it twice, unsure why my presence would suddenly matter. That night, standing in my apartment, keys to my old Camry on the counter beside the invitation, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt the familiar tightening in my chest. I was about to walk into another room that had never truly made space for me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the years of silence, of restraint, of choosing service over recognition, were about to be tested, and that the cost of being invisible was finally coming due. The days leading up to the gala always felt heavier than the event itself, like the slow pressure change before a storm you couldn't yet see. By Wednesday, the reminders began. Not invitations, those had gone out weeks ago, but expectations. Vanessa's messages were short and sharp, arriving without greeting. Please don't bring guests. We need a unified look this year. Avoid talking about personal projects. I read them in the quiet of my classroom after the students had gone home, their half-finished paintings drying on racks, their laughter still faintly lingering in the air. On Thursday afternoon, Catherine called. Her voice was warm, controlled, the way it always was when she wanted something without appearing to ask. Sophia dear, just a quick note about Saturday, she said. The Whittakers will be there. James Whittaker specifically asked if the family would be seated together. Family, the word hung between us, polished and fragile. I'll be there, I said, which was all she needed to hear. That's good, she replied. Also, the dress code is strict this year. Evening formal, designer preferably. The photographers are relentless. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a test. After we hung up, I stood in the empty classroom for a long moment, staring at a watercolor someone had left behind. Bold strokes, unapologetic color. Children painted the way adults forgot how to, without preemptive shame. That night, I called my colleague Sarah and asked if I could borrow the dress she'd worn to her sister's wedding. Navy, classic lines, 3 years old but impeccably cared for, she didn't hesitate. Of course, she said. You'll look beautiful. I thanked her, though beauty felt like the wrong goal. Friday brought the email. It came from Benjamin Hayes. Subject line unremarkable, tone precise. He asked me to confirm my attendance for the entire duration of the gala. Please do not leave early, he wrote. Documentation will be provided at the appropriate time. I read it twice, then a third time. Benjamin had been Alexander's lawyer for decades. He handled acquisitions, board disputes, quiet settlements that never reached the papers. He did not contact me casually. He certainly didn't give instructions without reason. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed again. Confirmed, nothing more. That evening, I drove home through Cambridge, my old Camry humming steadily beneath me. The streets were familiar, comforting in their ordinariness. My apartment waited at the end of the day. 2 bedrooms, mismatched furniture, walls lined with student artwork Alexander had insisted I keep. Proof of impact, he called it. As I laid the borrowed dress across my bed, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Your grandfather wanted you to know he's proud of you. Tomorrow, everyone else will understand why. I stared at the screen, my heart picking up its pace. Alexander wasn't one for dramatics. He showed pride quietly. An extra question, a longer lunch, a look that said, I see you. This felt different, heavier. I typed back, thank you. Then sat there longer than I meant to, the phone cooling in my hand. Saturday arrived with unnatural calm. I woke early, nerves already threading through my chest, and went through my morning routine with deliberate care. Coffee, shower, hair pinned simply at the nape of my neck, no jewelry beyond the thin silver necklace I'd worn for years, the one thing I'd never taken off. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The gown fit well, the navy fabric deep and understated. I looked composed, capable. I wondered if that would be enough. The drive into Boston felt like crossing a boundary. Bentleys and Ferraris lined the curb outside the Langham, engines purring softly as valets moved with practiced efficiency. When I pulled up, the attendant glanced at my car, then back at me. Staff parking is around the back, he said, polite but firm. I'm attending the gala, I replied. He hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Before he could respond, Vanessa's voice cut through the air. She's with us, she said from beside her sleek black Mercedes. Just park it somewhere discreet. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Crystal chandeliers cast light over white linens and silverware that caught every movement. The air smelled faintly of orchids and champagne. Conversations overlapped in low, confident tones, the sound of people who believed they belonged. Vanessa moved through the room effortlessly, greeting donors, laughing at the right moments, her presence commanding attention. Catherine followed close behind, elegant and composed, every gesture rehearsed. I lingered near the entrance, watching the performance unfold. At the registration table, I searched for my place card. Vanessa, table 1. Catherine, table 1. Board members, donors. Even Vanessa's boyfriend of 3 months had a seat at the family table. My name wasn't there. Oh, there must be a mix-up, Catherine said when she appeared beside me, concern carefully arranged on her face. She touched the sleeve of my borrowed dress, her fingers light, appraising. That looks lovely on you, dear. Sarah's dress, isn't it? From her sister's wedding. She flagged down the coordinator. There was whispering, a glance in my direction, more whispering. A new card appeared, table 12, with the catering staff's guests and the photographer's assistant. You'll be more comfortable there, Catherine said gently. Less pressure. I nodded. What else was there to do? As I walked toward my assigned seat, I felt it. The tightening, the familiar sense of being managed into a smaller space. Around me, the gala continued to swell, laughter rising, glasses clinking. No one noticed the storm gathering, but I did. And somewhere deep beneath the surface calm, I sensed that this night was already moving towards something none of them were prepared to face. The gala didn't announce its beginning with a single moment. It unfolded gradually, like a curtain lifting inch by inch. At table 12, I sat between a photographer's assistant and the catering manager's guest, both polite, both careful not to ask why I was there. From my seat, I could see everything. Table 1 glowed beneath the chandeliers, white orchids arranged with obsessive precision, crystal glasses aligned perfectly. Vanessa sat at the center, relaxed, radiant, unmistakably in command. Catherine angled herself slightly toward the most influential donors, her posture flawless, her smile curated. Dinner service moved like choreography. Plates glided across linen. Conversations rose and fell in practiced rhythms. Screens around the ballroom flickered with previews of the auction items, education initiatives, arts grants, scholarships presented like polished promises. Vanessa's voice carried easily across the room. It always had. She was speaking to the Whitakers about the foundation's strategic evolution, her tone confident, assured. We've refined our focus this year. Less waste, more measurable impact. Someone asked about the schools. Oh, several, she replied smoothly. Though not everyone in the family is cut out for that kind of pressure. It landed softly, almost elegant. She laughed, lifting her glass. Sophia chose a different path, elementary school art. A ripple of polite amusement followed, not cruel, just dismissive, the kind that doesn't require defense. Catherine leaned in beside her. It's admirable, she added. Someone has to do those jobs. I didn't move, I didn't look down. Years of practice had taught me stillness. The waiter refilled my water and leaned in just enough to whisper, You teach at Jefferson, right? My niece had you last year. She still talks about you. I nodded, grateful for the grounding presence of someone who saw me clearly, if only for a moment. Across the room, Vanessa continued. She spoke about her recent travel, her negotiations, her leadership. Each story carried an unspoken comparison, achievement framed as identity, power as inheritance. At one point, she gestured vaguely in my direction. While I was closing a deal overseas, she said lightly, Sophia was, she paused as if searching for the right word. Teaching watercolor techniques to third graders, I said calmly, my voice carrying farther than I expected. The shift was immediate. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Vanessa looked at me, surprised, then smiled. How sweet, she said. Everyone needs hobbies. James Whittaker shifted in his chair. His gaze flicked to Alexander's empty seat, then back to me. Something in his expression tightened. Catherine cleared her throat. Sophia, she called, the tone gentle but firm. Since you're so good with children, would you mind helping the staff with dessert? They're a bit overwhelmed. The room paused. 200 people waited to see what I would do. I stood. The movement felt measured, intentional. Of course, I said evenly. I've always been better at helping than being helped. Vanessa smirked, satisfied. As I moved toward the service area, fragments of conversation followed me like soft echoes. So generous of the family. What a kind thing to do. They really did save her, didn't they? Dessert was served. Plates were cleared. Applause followed the final auction item. Champagne was poured for the next round of toasts. Vanessa rose from her seat. She tapped her glass gently with a crystal spoon. The sound cut cleanly through the room. Before we continue, she said, her voice warm, authoritative, practiced, I just need to address a small seating matter. A hush settled over the ballroom. I felt it then, not fear, but a quiet certainty, the sense that the evening had crossed a threshold and there was no returning from it. Vanessa's gaze moved deliberately across the room, and then it stopped on me. Vanessa didn't rush the moment. She never did. She let the silence settle. Let curiosity sharpen. Let 200 people lean forward without realizing they were doing it. Her eyes stayed on me as she smiled, slow and controlled, the way she did in boardrooms right before someone else lost ground. You know, she said lightly, tapping the rim of her glass once more, there's been a bit of confusion tonight about where people belong. A few guests laughed, unsure if this was meant to be a joke. Vanessa continued, unbothered. These events can be overwhelming, especially for people who aren't used to them. Her gaze flicked briefly to table 12, then back to me. I think we should clear it up publicly. Catherine shifted in her chair, not enough to stop anything, just enough to be seen trying. This table, Vanessa said, gesturing to table 1 with her glass, is for the Lang family, the people who built this foundation, this company, this legacy. She paused, letting the words land. Sophia, she said, my name stretched thin between her teeth. You should move. The room held its breath. You're sitting at the wrong table, she went on. But then again, her smile sharpened. You always have been. A ripple of laughter moved through the ballroom, louder this time, less uncertain. Vanessa tilted her head, studying me the way one studies a misplaced object. You see, table 1 is for family, for real family. She let the pause stretch. Not adopted kids. The laughter that followed was no longer accidental. It was real, comfortable, sanctioned. Something inside me went very quiet. I didn't look at Catherine. I already knew what I would find there: composure, restraint, the safety of silence. I didn't look at the donors or the board members or the people who suddenly found the tablecloths very interesting. I stood. The movement felt distant, like watching myself from somewhere just above the room. My hands were steady as I reached for my purse. A simple black bag, worn at the corners, nothing like the Hermes clutches resting on the table in front of Vanessa. 200 eyes followed me as I stepped toward table 1. Vanessa's smile widened, certain she'd won. She probably expected tears or an apology or an exit she could frame as grace. Instead, I stopped beside the waiter who had just arrived with a leather folder tucked under his arm. The bill, I saw Vanessa notice it a second too late. The waiter hesitated, unsure, his eyes flicking between us. I held out my hand. May I asked quietly. He passed me the folder. Inside, the number stared back at me, $3,270. 10 seats, champagne, wine, the special menu they'd insisted on ordering. I took out my card. It wasn't black. It didn't carry prestige by design, but it worked. For the whole table, I said clearly. The room stilled. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Are you serious? She asked. Trying to prove something. The machine beeped. Approved. I signed my name, added a generous tip, and handed the folder back to the waiter. Family should take care of each other, I said, my voice calm, carrying easily through the silence, even when the feeling isn't mutual. Catherine's fingers tightened around her napkin. Vanessa's triumph faltered, confusion bleeding through the cracks. This is unnecessary, she said quickly, and frankly inappropriate. I met her eyes for the first time that night. Consider it a graduation gift, I replied, from your table and your toxicity. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone at table 6 nodded almost imperceptibly. I didn't linger long enough to see who. I turned to leave. Each step felt measured, deliberate. I wasn't running. I wasn't retreating. 5 steps. That was all I made it before a voice cut through the air behind me. Hold on. It wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't Catherine. It was calm, authoritative, familiar in a way that made the room react before anyone fully processed why. I stopped. The sound of the chandeliers seemed suddenly too loud. Glasses clinked as people set them down without meaning to. Heads turned toward the ballroom entrance. A man stood just inside the doors, his navy suit immaculate, his posture unhurried. In his hand was a manila envelope sealed with red wax stamped neatly at the center. The murmur spread before he spoke. Benjamin Hayes, Alexander Lang's lawyer, the one who never appeared unless something irreversible was about to happen. Vanessa turned fully now, her earlier amusement gone. This is a private event, she said sharply. Whatever business you have can wait. Benjamin didn't look at her. This concerns the Lang family, he said evenly. All of them. His eyes moved to me. Miss Carter, he continued, voice steady, I need a moment of your time. The envelope felt heavier than it should have from where I stood. Around us, the room had shifted. People were no longer watching for entertainment. They were watching for consequence. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak again. Benjamin raised a single hand. Now, he said. And in that instant, I understood something with absolute clarity. The humiliation hadn't been the ending. It had been the trigger. And whatever was about to unfold would change far more than where I was seated. Benjamin Hayes didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The room had already bent toward him. This won't take long, he said, stepping fully into the ballroom. His shoes made a soft, deliberate sound against the marble floor as he walked toward the center. But it does require everyone's attention. Vanessa scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. You're disrupting a fundraiser. I'm fulfilling instructions, Benjamin replied calmly, very specific ones. He stopped a few steps from me and held out the envelope. Up close, I could see the red wax seal pressed into the paper, crisp and unbroken. The insignia of his firm was stamped cleanly at the center. Your grandfather insisted this be delivered tonight, Benjamin said, publicly after the toasts. A low murmur spread through the room. James Whittaker stood slowly from his seat. 2 other board members followed, their movements uncoordinated but purposeful. They didn't look surprised, they looked prepared. Catherine's composure cracked for the first time that evening. Alexander's affairs can wait until Monday's board meeting, she said sharply. This is neither the time nor the place. Benjamin turned to her, his expression polite but immovable. Actually, Mrs. Lang, it cannot wait. Monday's meeting requires Miss Sophia Carter's presence as the new majority stakeholder. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa laughed high and sharp. That's absurd, she said. I'm the heir, I'm blood. Benjamin didn't react. Blood is not the determining factor, he said. Conduct is. I hadn't opened the envelope yet, but pieces were falling into place. The lunches, the questions Alexander had asked me, the way Benjamin had watched without commenting, the email insisting I stay for the entire gala. Open it, Benjamin said quietly to me. Please. My hands were steady as I broke the seal. Inside were several documents, their edges stiff, official, a revised last will and testament, a board resolution, and a letter folded once. Alexander's handwriting unmistakable. Read the will first, Benjamin advised. Section 3. I found the passage and drew in a slow breath. To my beloved granddaughter, Sophia Carter, I read aloud, my voice carrying into the stunned stillness, who understands that family is built on loyalty, not biology. Vanessa surged forward. Stop, she snapped. This is private. Benjamin stepped between us with practiced ease. Your grandfather was explicit, he said. This is to be read in full. I continued. I leave 60% of my estate, including controlling interest in the Lang Group and full directorship of the Lang Foundation, to Sophia Carter, conditional upon the dignity clause remaining unviolated by other beneficiaries. Catherine sank back into her chair. Vanessa stood frozen, the color draining from her face. What dignity clause? She demanded, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew. I turned the page. The dignity clause states that any beneficiary who publicly humiliates, demeans, or denies the familial status of another beneficiary forfeits their entire inheritance. This forfeiture is immediate and irreversible upon violation. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Vanessa's gaze snapped to me, then to Benjamin. That's fake, she said. It has to be, he'd never. There is video, Benjamin said evenly. Your grandfather insisted on recording the signing. He wanted no ambiguity regarding his intentions or his mental capacity. At his nod, a staff member wheeled in a screen. The lights dimmed slightly. The room leaned in. Alexander appeared on the screen, seated at Benjamin's desk, his posture upright, his eyes clear. The sight of him sent a sharp ache through my chest. I, Alexander Lang, being of sound mind and body, he said, do hereby revise my will. I have watched my biological family treat my adopted granddaughter as less than for far too long. Sophia has shown more grace, loyalty, and integrity than those who claim this name by blood. Vanessa's hands trembled. Vanessa, Alexander continued, his voice steady, if you are watching this, it means you have finally shown your true character in public. The very act of this recording being played confirms that the dignity clause has been violated. The screen went dark. The room erupted, not with applause, but with whispers, gasps, the sound of reality rearranging itself. This is manipulation, Vanessa shouted. You played him. You turned him against his own family. James Whittaker spoke before Benjamin could. I had lunch with Alexander the week this was signed, he said calmly. He was sharp, clear, fully aware. Dr. Samuel Brooks stood from his seat. I can confirm that, he added. Alexander passed every cognitive evaluation. Vanessa looked around desperately, searching for allies. Chairs shifted, eyes dropped. Even her boyfriend had stepped back. Benjamin cleared his throat. There is one more clarification, he said. The dignity clause is self-executing. Miss Vanessa Lang's public statements tonight constitute a violation. He paused. Her inheritance, approximately $40 million, is hereby forfeited in full and transferred to the Lang Foundation's endowment. Vanessa staggered as if struck. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. Is there any appeal? No, Benjamin replied gently. Your husband made that very clear. Security approached, hesitant but alert. Vanessa spun toward me, fury and disbelief colliding in her eyes. This isn't over, she said. I'll contest it, I'll take everything back. With what resources? Benjamin asked quietly. The truth landed heavily. The gala, the chandeliers, the power Vanessa had wielded so effortlessly. None of it belonged to her anymore. I stood there, the will still warm in my hands, aware of the weight of the moment, but not crushed by it. For the first time, justice hadn't arrived loudly or violently. It had arrived cleanly, and as the room shifted around me, I sensed there was still more to come. Truths Alexander had held back, lessons he intended to finish teaching. But that would come next. For now, the balance had tipped. The room didn't recover its breath after the will was read. It simply learned how to breathe differently. The screen flickered back on before anyone could speak. Benjamin hadn't announced it. He hadn't needed to. The technician adjusted the sound, and Alexander Lang's face returned to the ballroom, older than I remembered, thinner but unmistakably steady. I wanted there to be no confusion, Alexander said on the recording, his voice calm, deliberate. So, if you're watching this, it means I was right to be thorough. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer spectacle. This was testimony. For years, Alexander continued, I watched silence do more damage than cruelty ever could. I watched people confuse politeness with morality and tradition with entitlement. His eyes sharpened slightly. I watched one child endure it with grace she never should have been asked to find. Vanessa let out a short, brittle laugh. This is absurd, she muttered. A performance. Alexander seemed to look directly at her through the screen. Vanessa, he said, if you're still telling yourself that, then you haven't learned anything at all. The room went still again. I did not create the dignity clause to punish, Alexander went on. I created it to protect. Power without restraint corrodes everything it touches. I hoped the existence of that clause would be enough to make you choose differently. Catherine's hands trembled in her lap. Alexander's voice softened just slightly. You didn't. Vanessa took a step forward. You turned him against us, she said to me, her voice rising. You played the victim for years. He felt sorry for you. Benjamin didn't interrupt. Neither did James Whittaker. They watched as Alexander answered for them. I was not manipulated, Alexander said firmly. I observed, I listened, I kept records. The screen shifted. A document appeared. Emails, timestamps, internal memos, names highlighted. Vanessa's name again and again. These are communications sent from company accounts, Alexander explained. Messages where you discussed removing Sophia from the will entirely, where you referred to her as a parasite we should have dealt with years ago. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Vanessa's face drained of color. Those were private, she said weakly. Out of context. They were sent from Lang Group servers, James said quietly. After multiple staff complaints, Alexander continued, relentless but measured, I asked for a full review. Not because I doubted Sophia, but because I needed to be certain of you. The screen changed again. 3 assistants resigned in 1 year, Alexander said. Each cited intimidation and verbal abuse. Each described a pattern. Anyone you perceived as beneath you was treated as expendable. Vanessa's boyfriend took another step back. But the final straw, Alexander said, his tone tightening, was not corporate. I felt it then, a warning ripple beneath my skin. I learned that you attempted to have Sophia's name removed from the family memorial garden, Alexander said, the plaque honoring her mother. My breath caught. That garden exists because her mother changed my life, Alexander went on. She was my 3rd-grade teacher. She taught me that wealth without responsibility is emptiness. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth. And she saved your life, Vanessa, Alexander said quietly. She pulled you from a pool when you were 3. She died years later, returning from your birthday celebration. I took Sophia in not out of charity, but out of debt and out of love. The room felt unmoored. Vanessa shook her head, backing away as if the truth itself were advancing on her. This is all staged, she insisted. You're humiliating me. No, Alexander replied gently. You did that yourself. Benjamin stepped forward then, his voice cutting through the tension. There is more, he said, but it's important to understand the sequence. He gestured to the screen. The board resolution was passed 6 months ago. Miss Carter was appointed CEO of the Lang Foundation at that time. Vanessa spun. That's impossible, I'm on that board. You were absent, James said. Spa weekend in the Hamptons, we had quorum. I felt the weight of that settle, not triumph but inevitability. Alexander's voice returned. Sophia has been working with me on the Foundation's educational initiatives for 2 years. The new arts programs in 30 schools, the teacher retention bonuses. Those were her designs. Murmurs spread. People turned toward me with new expressions. Recognition, recalibration, something close to respect. Vanessa's voice broke. So that's it, you give her everything. Alexander smiled faintly. I gave her responsibility, there's a difference. Benjamin raised a final document. There is also the matter of financial misconduct, he said carefully. $2 million diverted over 3 years. Even Vanessa looked shocked by that. We have bank transfers, forged approvals, and falsified reports, Benjamin continued. Your grandfather chose not to press charges immediately. He believed you might still choose differently. Vanessa laughed, hysterical now. So this was a trap. No, Alexander said from the screen. It was a mirror. The video ended. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about identity. Vanessa stood alone at the center of a room that had quietly shifted its allegiance. The power she'd worn like a birthright had evaporated, replaced by something colder. Accountability. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. And as the guests absorbed the truth, I sensed the axis of the story turning not toward punishment, but toward consequence, toward what would be done with what remained. That reckoning was still ahead, and it would demand more than signatures and screens. The room didn't erupt after the video ended. It fractured. People didn't shout or argue. They recalculated. Conversations restarted in lower registers. Phones appeared in hands, then disappeared again, as guests realized this wasn't a moment to document. It was a moment to survive with dignity intact. Benjamin waited for the noise to settle before speaking again. "There is one final matter your grandfather instructed me to address tonight," he said, his voice measured. Something even Miss Lang was not aware of. Vanessa lifted her head sharply, suspicion and exhaustion warring across her face. Benjamin turned to me. "Alexander maintained a separate trust in your name," he said. "He began it when you were 10 years old." My breath caught. "That's not possible," I said quietly. You did," Benjamin replied gently. "You just didn't know what became of it." He opened another folder, this one worn at the edges, its leather softened with time. Alexander called it the Kindness Trust. The words sounded almost fragile in the air. "When you were 10, Benjamin continued, you gave Alexander $100, birthday money. You asked him if he could help you use it to buy art supplies for children who couldn't afford them. I remembered the jar, the way I'd counted the bills twice, nervous that it wasn't enough. Alexander had smiled and said he'd see what he could do. He invested that money," Benjamin said, "and he added to it every time you chose service over comfort, every tutoring session you didn't charge for, every bonus you redirected to your classroom, every program you built quietly without credit." He handed me a small journal. Inside were entries in Alexander's handwriting, dates and amounts recorded with care. October 2010. Sophia teaches art at the shelter. Add $10,000. March 2015. Forgoes spring break to support students. Add $25,000. December 2019. Buys supplies for entire school. Add $50,000. The list went on. 22 years of compound growth. "The trust is currently valued at approximately $100 million, Benjamin said. The room stilled again, but this time the reaction was different. Not shock, awe edged with something like humility. Vanessa laughed weakly. "You can't spend it," she said. "That's the catch, isn't it?" Benjamin nodded. "Correct. The trust is irrevocably structured for charitable use only. Education, arts programs, support for underserved children." I surprised myself by laughing. Not bitterly, not triumphantly, just freely. "He turned my $100 into $100 million, I said softly, "and never once let me touch it." Alexander's voice echoed in my memory. Money multiplies when planted in generous soil. Benjamin closed the journal. "There's more," he said. "Your grandfather also directed an immediate restructuring of the Lang Foundation." James Whittaker stepped forward. "The board confirmed the changes 6 months ago," he said. "Effective immediately, Sophia Carter is the sole CEO." A murmur rippled through the guests, board members, donors, people who suddenly understood where authority now rested. "The foundation will return to its original mission," James continued. "Arts, education, teacher support, long-term investment in schools, not branding." Benjamin added, "Miss Carter has also pledged $25 million from her inheritance to launch the Second Horizons initiative, full scholarships for orphaned and fostered children, teacher training programs in 50 districts." Applause began at table 6. Mrs. Chen stood, clapping without hesitation. Others followed, parents, educators, donors who had been waiting for substance behind the spectacle. Vanessa stood frozen, the room she once commanded now orbiting someone else. Security approached her quietly. "Miss Lang," the officer said, respectful but firm, "will need to escort you out." "This is illegal," Vanessa snapped. "I'll sue all of you." "With what resources?" Benjamin asked softly. The reality landed at last. Her personal accounts had been tied to her inheritance. Access revoked. Cards frozen. The empire she'd worn like armor dissolved in real time. As she was led toward the exit, phones buzzed across the room. Headlines were already forming. Lang Heir loses fortune in gala reversal. Teacher takes control of Legacy Foundation. Catherine remained seated. When Benjamin turned to her, his voice gentler now, the room leaned in once more. The dignity clause extends to any beneficiary who enables such conduct, he said. You have 72 hours to make your position clear. Catherine swallowed. She looked at Vanessa's retreating back, then at me. I failed you, she said quietly. Not to the room, to me. I see that now. She stood, removed the necklace at her throat, and placed it on the table. I'll be signing my inheritance over to the foundation, she said. All of it. A different kind of silence followed. Not stunned, resolute. People began to move differently. Staff who had once been invisible were thanked by name. Board members who had stayed silent under Vanessa's reign found their voices. Donors approached me, not to congratulate, but to ask how they could help. I felt the weight of it settle, not as pressure, but as purpose. Later, as the ballroom emptied and the noise faded, Benjamin handed me a final envelope. Alexander wanted you to have this when the dust settled, he said. Inside was a note written in the familiar slant of my grandfather's hand. You were never the adopted one, it read. You were the chosen one, the one who chose kindness when no one was watching. My hands trembled, but my heart didn't break. It steadied. The night had stripped power down to its bones and rebuilt it into something else entirely, not dominance, responsibility. And as the last guests left and the lights dimmed, I understood that healing was possible, but only with conditions. Truth, accountability, and work still to be done. 3 days later, I stood in a classroom that smelled faintly of paint and paper towels, the way it always had. Sunlight filtered through wide windows at Jefferson Elementary, catching on jars of cloudy water and half-used pallets. 20 small desks waited patiently, some scarred with initials carved by children who had grown and moved on. On the board, I'd written the day's lesson in neat block letters. Color and emotion. Nothing about the room knew what had happened at the gala. That was the point. I drove there that morning in the same old Camry, coffee cooling in the cup holder, the radio playing softly. No escort, no headlines, just me arriving early to set up supplies the way I always did. When the bell rang, my students poured in with the unfiltered energy only children have. Ms. Carter, Timothy called out, my mom said you're on the news. I smiled. Your mom watches too much television. Are you rich now? Another student asked, genuine curiosity in her eyes. I paused, then knelt to her level. I've always been rich, I said. I get to be here. She considered that, then nodded, satisfied. As they painted, tongues poking out in concentration, I felt the last tension drain from my shoulders. This was where everything made sense, where power wasn't inherited or defended. It was shared, measured in patience and encouragement. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. Interview requests, statements to issue, questions about leadership strategy and market response. The board could wait. The world could wait. The work couldn't. Later that week, I stood before the Lang Foundation board for the first time as CEO. The room was quieter than the gala had been, but the weight was heavier. I outlined the future without flourish. Scholarships for 1,000 orphaned and foster children each year, arts programs restored and expanded, teacher retention incentives funded properly, not as marketing, but as commitment. I'll continue teaching, I said, watching the surprise ripple through the room. 3 days a week. The foundation exists to serve schools. If I'm not in one, we've already lost our way. No one argued. The headlines followed anyway. Teacher inherits empire, keeps teaching. Lang Group stock stabilizes under new leadership. From charity case to charity leader. I read none of them. What I did read were emails from former students, now in college, now parents themselves, telling me about the first time they believed their voice mattered. Notes from teachers across the country asking how to apply for the new programs. Messages from donors who said quietly that they'd been waiting for this kind of leadership. Vanessa didn't contact me at first. When she finally did, it wasn't dramatic, just a message sent late at night. I'm starting over, entry level, I'm sorry. I didn't reply right away. Some bridges don't rebuild on command. Catherine came by the classroom one afternoon, standing awkwardly near the door. She looked different without the armor of wealth. Lighter, maybe, or simply exposed. I'm volunteering at a community center now, she said. Art therapy, I thought I should learn how to give without being seen. I nodded. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't a declaration. It was a process. Months later, the Lang Foundation held its annual gala again. Not at a hotel, not with chandeliers. We held it at Jefferson Elementary. Families brought dishes from home. Children displayed their artwork on folding tables. The auction featured paintings with starting bids of $25. We raised more money that night than any previous gala in the foundation's history. Vanessa showed up near the end, quietly wearing jeans and paint-splattered sneakers. She didn't ask for anything. She just helped clean brushes and stack chairs. It wasn't redemption, it was work. And that was enough. On the anniversary of Alexander's passing, Benjamin handed me one last letter. He'd been told to wait a year. You survived the storm, Alexander wrote, and you didn't become it, that matters. I folded the letter and placed it in my bag next to a receipt I'd kept all these years. The original $100 I'd saved as a child, laminated, edges worn. The fortune hadn't changed me. It had revealed me. Family, I'd learned, wasn't blood or money or legacy. It was who chose you when it was inconvenient, who stood beside you when silence would have been easier. If this story hit home for you, whether it's the sting of being underestimated, the sweet rush of quiet success, or the messy fallout of family expectations. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Also, please hit that subscribe button on the Revenge Mag right now so you never miss the next story that might feel like it was written just for you. Check the description below for links to other videos. There are more tales of underdogs turning the tables, family twists, and hard-won victories waiting for you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've got your own story of being written off, proving them wrong, or navigating that complicated sibling dynamic, share it below. I read every single comment and I'll reply to all of them. Your stories matter, and sometimes seeing you're not alone is the most powerful part. See you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.